So the technique that we're going to learn in this video builds on the technique we learned in my last video, which was about the king-rook checkmate. If you haven't seen that video yet, click on the link in the upper right-hand corner to watch it now. The king-queen checkmate. I saved this one for a second because I feel like the rook checkmate is more important in the sense that even if you don't know how to checkmate with the queen, you can still technically do the rook checkmate because the queen's moves are a superset of the rook's moves. It's just that with a queen, it's possible to checkmate slightly faster and in a slightly more flexible way. So, last video we talked about the box. Both the rook and the queen can form a box and trap the king inside of that box. The difference is that for the rook, there's kind of a weak point on this square. If the king ever moves onto that square, the rook can't apply pressure anymore and has to back off. But the queen doesn't have that weakness. Because she controls this diagonal, the king can never get close enough to actually challenge the queen and push her back. As long as you're playing correctly, you can keep forcing the king into whatever direction you want. Now what this means for you, the winning side, is that you can use the queen to force the king into a certain sector of the board. And usually what you'll do is you'll pick the sector that your king is already in. So for this example, if my king is in the bottom left corner over here, I would probably move the queen somewhere over here. Then the king is forced to go deeper into this direction towards my own king. So there's kind of like a four-step process to checkmating with the queen. Step 1 is to restrict the enemy king to the same sector of the board that your king is in. Second is to maneuver your king so that your king is closer to the center and their king is closer to the edge of the board. 3 is to force the enemy king onto the edge of the board. And 4 is to maneuver the king right in front of your king like this and then deliver checkmate. The objective is similar to the rook endgame in that you still want your king on top of the enemy king like this, 2 spaces away, of course. But the difference is that there's multiple ways for you to deliver checkmate here. So you can do it this way, the same way as with the rook, but you can also do this. If the queen is pressed up against the enemy king like this on the edge of the board, this is also checkmate. And this is the more common one you'll see with the queen, because it's a little bit easier to recognize and pull off. Also important is that this doesn't have to be a king. This can be any other piece, a rook, a bishop, a knight, etc. As long as there's something supporting the queen on this square, that's still checkmate. So I mentioned before that there's a stalemate trap. For your purposes, stalemate has 2 conditions that have to be true. 1 is that your opponent has no legal moves, and 2 is that they are not in check. If both of those things are true, then it's a stalemate. This is one of the most common ones, I think, because the king can't move, but he's also not in check, so it's stalemate. Another important one to know is when the king is in the corner like this. A queen over here stalemates by herself. You generally speaking don't want to end up in this situation. You can usually play over here instead, and that gives the king room to just slide around in here so you don't stalemate by accident. And then you can just move your king to here whenever you have time and deliver checkmate like that. Okay, so that's the queen-king checkmate in a nutshell. It's a little bit more conceptual than the rook checkmate and a little bit more freeform. You can execute it in a lot of different ways, which is kind of why I saved it for a second, because if you understand the rook checkmate, it helps you understand the queen checkmate. Those 2 checkmates are enough to get you through like 99% of all chess games. There's 2 other checkmate patterns that involve an empty board, and those are the 2 bishops checkmate and the bishop knight checkmate. This one's not so bad. I would say that like once you have a handle on all the basics of the game, you can look into this one if you're curious. This one is a mess. It's a nightmare to try to execute. Don't even bother with it until you're like an intermediate to advanced player because it's very complicated and you're probably never going to see it. But it is really cool, and I think it does make you a better chess player to know it. So do look into it when you get better at chess. Don't look into it while you're a beginner. The queen and the rook checkmates are more than enough to get you through almost all of your games.